That literally has never happened to me before. I'm
That's
sorry that hopefully that didn't cause any issues.
No, that's all right. That's all right. We'll be a few minutes behind, but we're good. And we are live. So, hello everyone. This is Rebel One Live. We have our first VC guest tonight, Helene Servillon. She is a cannabis investor, so appropriate. We didn't do this on 420 so that everyone who celebrates 420 can celebrate properly. And then today we can talk about cannabis investing. So thanks for joining us today, Helene.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, and happy belated 420 to everybody out there who celebrated, and to everybody who just learned about it.
Great. It's awesome. So we'll dive right in. Helene, I've known for a while. She's a friend, and then also has been through the Rebel One Investor Training Program as well, and she is running her own fund and in the middle of that process of establishing it and moving forward. But she's has a portfolio of cannabis investments and also a background in entrepreneurship. I wanted to know if we can kick off and if you can share a little bit more about how you made it to partner at JourneyOne and also Greater Holdings.
Wow. So where do we begin? So many different directions we can go into, but I think when I first got started in the cannabis industry, it was mid 2017. And prior to that, I've always worked in emerging markets. So I was in the electric bike industry in 2012, when that was before bike share hit the ground in the US. And everybody was like, what are you doing working in the electric bike industry? What is that? Um, so that was a great first time experience of working in a very nascent market that people were very unfamiliar with. From the electric bike industry, I ended up working into for a voice analytics startup out of San Francisco called VoiceBase, and really got my feet wet in the tech industry. And from there, I ran a customer success team and was heading strategic partner marketing with accounts like AWS and Twilio. So really got to understand how the tech world worked and the latest trends in tech, such as AI, machine learning. And I learned so much in my 20s, and I think Sergi and I both went to Northeastern University, which has a great co-op program. And I always look back at how did I end up where I am now. And what the co-op program taught me was to really explore and challenge yourself with different type of industries and interests that you have for work. So I basically took my 20s and co-opted that. And in doing so, I've always had innate tenacity for challenge, but I wanted to channel that into something that I was really, really passionate about. Not just, I don't look at work as something that pays the bills. It's more of a space that speaks to who I am. And so I wanted to channel that energy into an industry that really aligned with my vision and the culture that, I surround myself with. So when in mid 2017, I started hearing about the fruition of the recreational cannabis market in California. And, it went medically legal in 1996. And it was the first state to do medicinal cannabis legalized. And I saw the opportunity, was really intrigued, and started literally just like going and hustling to networking events, asking people, what they knew about the industry, and subscribing to every newsletter that I can and every podcast that I could. So I literally just started reaching out to a few folks in my network and said, I'm really interested in pivoting from being an operator, and I want to move into cannabis, and I want to move into venture capital. And at that time, there were very little cannabis investors in the space. And it was really challenging to even really follow a lot of there was no standard for who the thought leaders were at the time, in my opinion. So I had luckily reached out to a friend who connected me with one of his angel investors, So I worked with the group for a little under a year to lead their portfolio strategy. And they were one of the first cannabis investors in Y Combinator's first fleet of cannabis companies. And that includes Meadow and Confident Cannabis. So that was the initial foray.
And for you said a number of things. So I wanted to backtrack. What was for when you shifted from working in a startup to and the startup was focused on electric bicycles? How did you make that shift? Like, what helped you? You basically changed industries of focus, right? So what helped you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I made a couple of pivots. Even before electric bikes, I worked at Puma and Reebok corporate. And so I think how I did that was essentially I made a training guide, a personal one, where I put together a list of different terms and vernacular that I need to understand. I'm in different mechanics of, a bike and how to speak to engineers and factory owners. And also, work in different cultures. At a very young age, I was 22 and they sent me to go to these trade shows across the world by myself. So I went to Germany and Taiwan and China, and had to build this, electric bike business from the ground. And it was literally just like hustling my way and going through football field size hangars of bike companies.
When you made that shift though for you, and you were just starting out, did you? It was mainly in California, right? At the time.
Into cannabis.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of where I focused my interest in the industry.
Yep.
Yeah. So, if you look at the cannabis industry as a whole, there's 33 medicinal states and a little over a dozen recreational markets now in the US. And each individual state has its own governing bodies and regulations. So you almost want to think about it as 33 separate countries. And my focus was primarily in California. I would say the first 6 months. And then I got to a year of understanding the industry and had interest and made contacts with folks in Colorado, in Oregon and Washington. But understanding the nuances of the California market alone was really challenging because the supply chain is very fragmented.
Is that a problem? I mean, for people that don't know Helene. Helene, I'll call you out in making that transition. You make it sound really easy. Helene is a assiduous networker, right? She goes out, knows everyone. She goes to every event, talks to, she knows who's who and what's what. So I'm sure the transition and the hustle of where you are now, you're I just want to give you credit where credit's due in doing that. And then now in the space, every time I think of a cannabis, and if I hear of a cannabis investment, I'm like, send it to Helene. Like, even if I don't, I'm like, you know what, I wouldn't invest in this, but Helene should know about it, and she probably does know about it already. So I'm going to pass it along, and the connection in the space. But wanted to share. You talk about the 30 different countries and thinking of it that way. What are some of the other challenges, the unique challenges of investing in this space?
Oh man, it's a myriad of challenges. I think the regulatory landscape in itself is one that you have to know. And so, in terms of that, let's break it down in a couple of things. Supply chain, understanding the supply chain and operations of how,
each state, right?
Well, let's stick with California for starters, and then we can go a little wider.
Yep.
So, because, California has a lot of heritage within cannabis in the illicit market, and in the recreational market, even though Colorado has, a couple of years on California's rec market. So if we want to break it down to what are the major challenges, I would say, the fragmented supply chain creates a lot of different hurdles. in terms of quality of product, capital access. So making sure that the companies you're investing in and the partners that they work with also have are working with suppliers that are going to survive the year is really important. So fragmented supply chain, I would say capital strength, and also regulatory landscape is a big one. Making sure you always understand what different nuances with taxes, and also how each municipality is governing the laws within that that region is important, because we also have what the state laws are and the local and municipal laws. So it's, you know, in any highly regulated market, for example, you know, what Uber and Lyft had to do is that they had lots of lobbyists to help them pioneer and shift how laws used to be, so that they could, you know, help provide a path for them to succeed and grow market share and scale their businesses, because before, the infrastructure was not made for them. So in terms of what I mean by fragmented supply chain, so if you look at California in particular, a lot of the companies that initially raised capital were building vertically integrated operations. And the reason why they were building vertically integrated operations is because, you know, if I'm you know, Helene's brownie company, let's, for example, back in the day, I needed to extract my own oil and also manufacture my own goods to make my product. If you look at other industries outside of cannabis, in traditional CPG, you have a plethora of different suppliers to choose from. It might be even like, you might even have like option paralysis, and you have, you know, hundreds of different co-manufacturers across the nation that can make your product. So, you know, those are some of the nuances when you're looking at a cannabis investment. And so that's one category that we can go down, but lots of different rabbit holes.
No, I appreciate that. I spoke to a friend of mine that's a lawyer focused on cannabis, but in New Jersey, not San Francisco. San Francisco is much more advanced and robust, and he dived into exactly this. It's from the, you know, from the payments to the logistics, infrastructure, manufacturing, lots of challenges in that space. When so can you share a little bit more about what's happened traditionally when we were looking at cannabis investments there?
Yeah.
They were you know, I would say overvalued, but to the market, because there's such a large opportunity. It's a whole industry that I wouldn't even say it's a new industry. It's an industry that's being legitimized. You know, what are some unique characteristics you look for when you're looking at these investments?
Yeah, so I think, you know, the interesting thing about being a cannabis investor now versus being a cannabis investor when I first started, and when the markets initially opened recreationally, is that we have a lot more data and we have a lot more learnings. There's a saying of, you know, it's great to be a pioneer, but the people who really survive are the settlers. And so what I mean by that is, even if we go back to the conversation about nascent supply chain, now we have a more richer infrastructure to invest into, which enables different types of companies. So if you look at the past 2 years in the specifically the West Coast and California market, investing in supply chain and building, you know, you saw the best distributors come to market, and also cultivators for flower, and then also processing and extraction for distillate oil to make products like edibles. And now we have co-manufacturers. In 2019, we launched beverages in California. And so there's different characteristics of what makes a good looking company now that's very different from 2 years from today. The areas that I look at for in JourneyOne, I've categorized as culture, technology, and also health sciences. And what that looks like is, for me, culture is a bigger, broader category than just consumer brands. I look at it as, companies that really shift and shape culture, will shift and shape movements, and also have very loyal customers. So if you look at the alcohol and the kind of tobacco industry, you see that it's not just, these aren't just products, right? They permeate everything in pop culture, in music and entertainment, in professional and personal. So in terms of, the culture category, we can break it down into consumer brands, ancillary products, like smoking devices or rolling trays, or brands that can create products like that. If you think about all the sub brands that were created around Apple products, those are massive companies in themselves. And then also just general consumer goods. The second category of technology is like fundamental businesses that power the industry. So, the POS, which is essentially the operating system that powers dispensaries, I would say that ship has sailed in terms of most of the, we have category leaders in that space now that are raising growth rounds. Green Bits, for example, I think they're in a dozen and a half states across the US. And they raised either something around $20 or $30 million growth round, with some coming from, notable investors. So we have POS systems, marketplaces, delivery, and now we're starting to see companies take off and enable direct to consumer, which is an investment that I did called Flower Company. So, that's interesting new technology that's going to open up different sales revenue for brands, because in the world of cannabis, direct to consumer is not that easy. You need, if I want to order something online from Helene's Brownies company, and I go to the website and check out, my delivery partner has to have a license. And when I pick up my product, they can't just drop it off at my front door. I need to show my driver's license and verification that I'm of age for this purchase. So that provides a lot of access to getting richer customer data if you enable D2C. And then the third category, health and sciences, I tend to talk about that category as data-driven and wellness-focused companies. So in terms of what that looks like, companies that are focused on mental health, sexual wellness, pet category, I think is going to be massive. So all of these type of sectors I look at as potentially highly scalable, where they can go to market in cannabis, but also have the opportunity to grow outside of the industry into different categories. But because cannabis is such a high growth market, there's easier, I wouldn't say easier, but I would say that it's an edge to be different in a sector where there's capital coming in, and it's even the word cannabis, when you're in a room full of investors, like there's not that many of them. So by nature, you're going to be more attracted by what's new.
Yep, absolutely. I want to walk to what you said about infrastructure, right? Like you talk about the point of sale systems, logistics, distribution, cash, movement of cash. Those are all unique challenges within the cannabis industry, because it's not federally legal, and then each state handles its own, and I didn't realize also the municipality has its own rules. What are you concerned at all in investing in some of these businesses when, let's say, it is federally legal, right? Like we'll cross that bridge at some point. Would these systems just move over from a unique POS that's focused on cannabis to just using the squares of the world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. This industry is so nuanced that specializing Specializing is very important. We have seed to sale tracking, and understanding, the different parties. It's important to be ingratiated in the industry, because this is an industry where people really, it's quite intimate. I wouldn't say the word is small. I would say intimate, in that everybody knows each other to some degree, even across state. So, bringing on business, it is very relationship based. And I think understanding who the different stakeholders, and getting some big clients takes relationships, just like any industry. But in terms of the nuance of like an ancillary company specializing in cannabis, like why that's important, is because of the compliance and regulatory tracking that's needed. And so, Square now is offering CBD they're taking on CBD companies. They did like a beta rollout, I think sometime last year, in the middle of the year. And that was a big move for them because they're a massive company. But, hemp is kind of in this like ambiguous state of the Farm Bill legalized industrial hemp, but different categories of hemp are still questionable. So if you are an ingestible product, the FDA is trying to figure out how do we regulate that to make sure that consumers are safe, and that products that are going into the market aren't just snake oil, and that what people are marketing and making claims for are justified. That's why we have the FDA, and we have clinical trials for pharma companies, because you can't just sell a drug and say that it can help you go to sleep and cure your stomach pain if it hasn't really been tested. And we want to make sure that when you take a product, that you're not just gonna have an allergic reaction to it. So
that brings up almost the opposite. There may be an opportunity further along, right? In the whole supply chain system, we don't have origin to consumption tracking, right? But it's necessary in the cannabis industry. So there may be learnings the other way as well, as it goes forward.
Yeah, like I'm trying to see if I have product. I have so much product, but in my bar cabinet, which I should call my cannabis cabinet. Most what you see on packaging, this is one of the companies that I advise, Potly. This is cannabis infused honey. They will have a batch number, and you'll see when this batch was actually packaged. And sometimes we don't really get that granularity in the regular food market. But this industry is so highly regulated that the regulated and approved products are quality in terms of safety.
I want to shift gears a little bit in the opportunistic fashion for entrepreneurs walking into the space right now. What do you think? Where would you send them? They said, I want to, I've been a consumer, really excited about the industry, and I've been an entrepreneur in other areas. I want to enter this one. What would you tell them?
Well, there's so many different directions that you can go into. The reason why I truly love this industry is that it permeates every major industry that you can think of. I've mentioned tobacco and alcohol, and also consumer product goods, technology, even like HVAC. It's ridiculous, and agriculture. So, where I always kind of center myself is, what are my strengths? Or ask yourself, what are your strengths? How could you provide those strengths and value to a company, or to start a new company that could be, very fundamental in this industry? I don't think it's not a very easy industry to work in. There's lots of different hurdles to suss out when you start a cannabis business. I mean, I've never seen so many lawyers on a startup company team. You got like 2 or 3. You have your corporate lawyer, you have your compliance lawyer, and then you have just like another lawyer making sure everything is good and checked in place. And then, capital is a bit challenging in this area, which is makes it a great opportunity for me to find good deals. But if you think about the world of venture capital, I would say maybe less than a 1% goes to cannabis funding. And so the reason for that is that, it's still federally illegal. And a big fund like Andreessen Horowitz or First Round Capital, they might have, their limited partners who were investors in their fund that are institutional LPs and government-related entities that have clauses in their agreements that they can't invest in cannabis. So it creates a lot of different roadblocks to getting access to capital. But the fun and exciting part about being an entrepreneur in this space is that everything that this industry does is really derived on a plant that has like long medicinal and social history. We just really learned about the endocannabinoid system in the 70s. And if not many people even know what the endocannabinoid system is, but it essentially regulates homeostasis and balance in the body. And so we have 2 receptors in the body. We naturally make cannabinoids, but the plant also has a variety of different cannabinoids. There's about 130 different cannabinoids in the plant, and we know about like a couple of dozen. So, from a high level, we study 3% of the plant, and that leaves 97% open for innovation. And so, for entrepreneurs out there, even though the industry is thriving and booming, we still are learning as we're going. Every day and every week that I look at market news, it's like this industry travels faster than anything I've ever been in before in my entire life. And I live a pretty fast-paced life, so it keeps me on my toes.
What is it about let's flip to the investor. It's like if I'm walking into this industry, networking and knowing my regulatory landscape, knowing who the players are locally, getting to meet them so that there's those relationships. But since the pace of change is so fast, what else can investors do to get smart on the area as they're entering the cannabis space?
Yeah, I think my recommendation is to it's hard to kind of do cannabis as an investor. So for example, like I've seen a couple of companies that have been invested in and they have no cannabis expertise on their cap table, but have been able to raise a good chunk of money. And I'm talking about like maybe $3 to $5 million. In really interesting companies, but they're more like tech-enabled companies. They're not really cannabis companies. They might have something basic, just like hemp extract with MCT oil in their formulation. And I think it's important to really understand the landscape and work with a trusted expert. So one way that I would approach if you are getting acclimated to the space is follow industry reports on a weekly basis. One of my favorite resources is New Cannabis Ventures. And Alan has been one of the oldest finance guys in the market. He has really sound content. I really respect the content that he has. And then also look at data. There are data sets like BDS Analytics and Headset that provide free reports on growth in the market and different categories of growth. So you can dissect what's happening in the consumer product goods space of dispensaries, like what's selling the most. Is it flower? Is it pre-rolls? Is it concentrates or edibles? So in every major city, there are cannabis groups. And one of my favorite things about this space is that inherently it's diverse. I think the heritage of where this industry started was very grassroots and was very kind of uh, very against the grain. And so I think what that lends itself to is, diverse investment opportunities across the US. Before, my first year and a half in cannabis, I was really focused on the West Coast market. And this past year in 2019, I started traveling a bit more. So I spent a good amount of time in New York and in Massachusetts, because I lived out there for almost 8 years. And then earlier this year, I was in Chicago. And the Chicago market opened up in January and did like 100 million in 3 months of revenue. So that's pretty exciting. So it really, I would say, like, start where you're located as a primary. And if that market's not really hot, then go somewhere closer to that region, because I have people from when I was in the bike industry and when I was in the tech industry and when I was working like a decade ago at Puma and Reebok, who are reaching out to me now and saying, hey, I really want to learn about cannabis. I'd love to have a chat with you and see, what you're up to. And some of them are asking, like, hey, I really want to invest in cannabis. What are your thoughts and opinions about that? So, I think there's so many different angles that you can start at. And it just depends on what your expertise is. And I would say lean into that first.
Okay, great. Well, one last question I wanted to ask is it's more of an opinion on how and what needs to happen at the policy level. I know some of these cities, they're especially Chicago, they were rolling out, right? They gave a limited number of license. They allowed those people that had license to open new businesses when, really there's a little bit of conflict, right? You're trying to, you there, Helene? Oh, we might have lost Helene. Helene, you there? Let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Gotcha, Helene. Hello, you there? Oh, it looks like we lost Helene, but that was Helene Servillon she was a partner at JourneyOne Ventures, sharing more about the cannabis VC space. Next up, we're going to have Kathryn Cooper, who's going to talk about innovation in the healthcare space. Amazing VC, also out of Los Angeles. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I'll do the intro when we get there. All right. So hello, everyone. This is Rebel One Live. We are here with Kathryn Cooper. She's a VC out of CTIP. I'll let her talk a little bit more about what that stands for, and she focuses on healthcare, medical devices. Thank you for joining us tonight from Los Angeles. Yeah, I'll kick it off. So thanks again for making the time.
Yeah, thanks guys for having me. I'm really excited to talk to the group. So my name is Kathryn Cooper. I'm co-director of CTIP, which stands for the West Coast Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics, long name, so we go by the acronym. We are a pediatric medtech accelerator centered at Children's Hospital Los Angeles and connected to 10 institutions across the West Coast, including pretty much every major children's hospital. My main focus at CTIP is I run our investment arm. I build our relationships with the global investment community, whether that's VC, angel, family offices, or strategics on behalf of our portfolio companies. I connect our founders with the right funds. I educate CTIP and the founders on investing in financial trends. And the most exciting part of my job is I get to invest directly in our portfolio companies. So we currently have a portfolio of 92 medical device companies. They're all pretty early stage. And what they have in common is they're looking at a pediatric indication. So they may be devices that will level up to the adult space, but they're looking at kids, meaning they'll affect people who are under 21. And so we see that as an unmet need, specifically in medical device and also in healthcare. Children are an underserved population. And so we're really happy to throw our money with both an impact and investment lens into these projects. CTIP is a $6.6 million fund. We're unique in the sense that we are funded by a grant from the FDA. So we are really looking at the impact of these projects kind of on the world and on the community, and that's really important to us. So.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And can you talk a little bit more about that structure? So the grant from the FDA, so those finances go into the startup, and then what runs the organization CTIP itself?
So CTIP is also run from those funds.
Okay.
We are run by, technically it's a P50 grant from the FDA. So money comes from the FDA into the institution that holds it, in our case it's CHLA, and then that funds CTIP. Part of that is invested into portfolio companies, part of that runs our operations and everything that we do, and we're funded through 2023.
And what made, and can you share a little bit more about your journey? How did you get to be a VC investor in the medical device space?
Sure. So I like to say it seems like CTIP is the end of a very calculated story arc, but if you talked to me a couple of years ago, it may have seemed like I was doing a lot of different things, but always in the healthcare space. So I'm originally from LA, native Angelino, really happy to be here home and running CTIP here. Then I went up to Stanford for undergrad. I majored in human biology. It was very much into the sciences. I was pre-med. I came back down to LA and went to medical school at USC. I transitioned out of medical school in my third year and really felt like my talents be better used in the business of medicine and kind of working with the startup community. So I started working specifically in health tech startups in a few different roles. First, what I would describe as a super nerdy clinical study analyst, like what you would do if you just left medical school and decided to throw yourself into the business world, and then slowly moved to strategy, biz dev with a more interest in investments. Because I love school, I went back to USC and got an MBA, and then started working with CTIP. So I ended up connecting with a friend from medical school. We run CTIP together. And I bring in an area of expertise that's part clinical, but mostly business, and picked up some experiences along the way. So I like to say I started working in startups and now I fund startups, and it's been a nice journey.
Is that something that you, from the beginning, you knew you wanted to be on the investment side, or when did that happen? That shift?
No, so that's definitely not something I saw from the beginning. I was really trying to get as many skills as I could, just in and around early stage companies, and kind of, even in the very beginning, kind of what is like a job? What do people do? That sounds like a very basic question to answer, but for me, having come from the sciences and medicine, which is a really linear path in the sense that, you kind of go to medical school, you do residency, you do fellowship, and then you're a physician. It's kind of a stepwise of what you do. When you're in an early stage company, maybe 1 year you're an analyst, the next year you're a project manager because they've decided to build out a new division, and no one's there to teach you the skill set. You're Googling stuff, you're going to events, you're trying to gain knowledge in other ways. And I found that the kind of tenacity for information and just trying to absorb things really quickly worked out really well from transitioning from medicine into business. Because in the startup world, it's kind of, you don't necessarily need to be an expert, but you need to be able to source that information very quickly. And the same thing in the investment space. So I may not know every single thing about every possible medical device or new invention, but we have a network of advisors, consultants, and those who study topics really deeply that we can reach out to. So part of, I think, what connected both working in startups and then later with being an investor is that ability to just look for the answers and then source that information pretty quickly. But to answer your question, no, I wasn't thinking I was going to be an investor from the beginning.
And what caused that shift?
I want to say business schools caused that shift. So I found myself thinking, okay, I'm going to go get an MBA, and then I'm going to find out that I'm a super genius at, marketing or insert analytics, right? I'm going to take a class and it's just going to hit me, and I'm going to be like, wow, this is great. This is totally what you should do. That clearly did not happen. But what I found myself doing was I really loved our entrepreneurship class, where we had to build out a full business idea from beginning to end, do the customer discovery interviews, do the pitches and figure that out. That was happening at the same time that I was working with CTIP and working with these founders, analyzing their pitch deck and having gone through the process myself and now giving them advice. I realized, oh, this is what I like doing. It's not that I have to be the person who's starting the company, but those skills are just as useful as an investor. And then you get this, I guess pattern recognition is a little bit of the dirty word, but in terms of early stage companies, and specifically in the device and healthcare space, a lot of their questions, concerns are similar. And so you tend to notice patterns and can kind of ask or guide these founders in certain ways. Like, you build something that's the best widget, that's great, but who's going to buy it? And if you tell me just kind of a hospital, okay, but why? You know, is this cutting down costs? Is this making things more efficient? Is this better than the gold standard in medicine? And let's really drill down to see, in the lens of healthcare, why these things are important, because it's not the same as looking at things as a typical, I guess, business case, in the sense that, you know, oh, I'm going to make a waiting list and then people are going to sign up for my app. You know, that's not the same for a device. Someone needs to use this in real life.
Yeah, can you go into that, what the nuances? Because I know from looking at right away, right, when you look at a SaaS company versus a hardware company, hardware is just tougher, right? The iteration cycles, the costs of doing that, it's you know, slower, more expensive. I imagine in the medical device space, there's even more barriers and nuances. Can you share some of your insight into that you use to guide your founders and investment?
So for us, we're looking at a couple things. So we're looking at this, does this fulfill an unmet need? And specifically, we're looking at the pediatric population. So is this something that pediatricians, pediatric surgeons, occupational therapists, or physical therapists who may work with kids, that is not being met by current solutions? So either you're different than a current solution and you're better, or you're creating something completely new that someone hasn't thought of. So you can treat this unmet need in either way. Then we're looking at the commercializability. So is there really a pathway to get from, you know, step A to step Z? What's nice about medical device is all the companies we're looking at are going through some sort of FDA regulatory pathway. And because it's regulated, it's very stepwise, in the sense that you will fill out a 510(k) application, you will get feedback to that, you need to do some sort of clinical trials. There are steps that you need to go through. Our goal as an accelerator is to condense those steps, or help our companies. You can't necessarily do the steps faster, but understand the steps you need to take and do those in the most efficient way. If on average it might take, let's say, 10 years to commercialize a device, if you can push it down to 8 by getting in touch with the right vendor or making some clinical introductions, so you can now do a clinical trial at a children's hospital, that's saving you a lot in time and effort as a founder, and we can help build that network. So we want to see, does the team have an idea of what the commercial landscape looks like, or will us guiding them help them do that? We're also looking at, does it seem, you know, feasible? We do fund a couple of moonshot products, but not often. If you're kind of playing out here in either like a super science and, you know, maybe it works great. We run an innovation competition once a year where we make direct investments in about 7 companies, and usually on average about one of those is a moonshot, where it may be unlikely to work, but we're really, if it did, it would be kind of transformational to peds. So those are some of the things that we look at when we're analyzing these companies.
That's great. Especially, it seems like a marriage of your background and your excitement, right? The fund as an accelerator, and helping these early stage founders move forward. Can you share a little bit more about where you find your founders?
So we find our founders from a variety of sources. A lot of our existing portfolio companies are great referrals to other founders, right? They're playing in the medical device space as a really early stage company, so they'll come across other folks. And a lot of them are using kind of similar vendors who may be working with more than one company. As I said, we're connected to 10 institutions on the West Coast, which makes up our consortium. So that goes from Seattle Children's Hospital to Oregon Health Science and University to Project Zygote, which is an accelerator in San Francisco, the Cedars-Sinai accelerator here in LA, UCLA and USC are both on our grant. It's one of the few grants that both rivals, I guess, are a part of together, in addition to UCSD. So from those clinical and academic partnerships, we can pull a lot of projects. Our really early stage teams tend to be a clinician, an engineer, and a business person. It's an outlier to get a really experienced team where it's a serial entrepreneur, but they come to us as well. And then a lot of our vendors, partners, and consultants refer companies who they've been working with, who they've come across. We also do what typical investors do. I'll go to pitch events and networking events and healthcare conferences, and both for brand awareness for CTIP that we exist and also to source new companies. But it's a mix of our academic clinical partners and software girls and doing things like this.
What'd you say?
I said, and doing things like this and getting to talk to a whole new group through Over1. So
yes. So I know for those that don't know Kathryn, she is on the road and involved in everything. It's great. She's like super connected. I love it. And she's also a mentor at Backstage Capital, your Quake Capital, and I'm sure there's a number of other places that I didn't mention, but I think that's how you build the network.
Yeah, we ended up funding a portfolio company that went through one of the Backstage accelerators in Detroit. Allergy is one of our portfolio companies. And we were connected to them through a couple sources, through my work with Backstage, through our work with MedTech Color, which is a nonprofit to accelerate the number of people of color in the medtech space. They're a founding member there. It's because we kind of play in a small pool that is medtech, you end up interacting with the same folks kind of often, and it's nice to see them through different channels, and also to make people who are creating adult devices even think of the pediatric space, because it may be something they were open to, but they weren't necessarily sure how to address. And our accelerator is here to teach them how to do that.
Yeah, and for those that Javier, the founder of that business, can you share a little bit more about why you chose to invest and back that business?
Sure. So Allergy is fantastic. They won one of our innovation grants last year, and that was our most competitive competition to date. We had over 100 applications from 20 different states across 17 different subspecialties within pediatrics. So it was really a broad range of projects. And it's very competitive in the sense that companies fill out an initial letter of intent, then we go through those and evaluate those. We invite a select group to fill out longer semifinalist applications, and then we select the winners. So Allergy was one of those 7. They are creating an EpiPen auto-injector case that goes on the back of a phone case. So if you have allergies and you have to carry around epinephrine, which is essentially your life-saving medication, you need to have it on your person or very, very nearby at all times. So they have revamped the case itself for the Epi that would go on the back of your phone case. So almost similar to how I have my credit cards here on the back of my phone, almost slim like this. You can take the Epi out, inject yourself if you're having a reaction. And then it has a companion app, which we really liked as well. We're seeing this more and more in device companies as technology advances, a companion app to go with the device, and it will alert your care circle. So whoever you want to add, your partner, your teacher, your friend, your parent, in addition to calling 911. So it's really adapted carrying around epinephrine for today's society. And while any age group can have allergies, it happens very often in children. And for children who are at least teenage age and above, a lot of them have cell phones here in developed countries. So adding this to something, if you've ever seen a 13-year-old, you probably can't take their phone away from them, right? So imagine if your life-saving medication was attached to your phone and easily accessible. And then it could also update people when you were having an issue. So we picked them because we thought it was a really, really interesting solution to a problem that exists. It may be solved by epinephrine, but not necessarily in a way that integrates into people's lives of today. And also we found among teenagers specifically, they become embarrassed about their allergies and tend to not necessarily have their life-saving medication on them. So maybe they leave it in their locker, or maybe they leave it at home, or they don't take it when they're out with their friends at their movies. And what if you're allergic to peanuts and you happen to eat a peanut and you don't have it with you? So that becomes a very large risk. And we saw this as solving an unmet need as it related to that pediatric population.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that example. I wanted to dive into what you had said a moment ago, that you're government funded, but you're not only making investments, you're also giving grants. Can you speak a little bit more about how your team thinks about when they give a grant versus an investment and making those decisions?
Sure. So I'll actually walk into the nuances. So when I say grant, it's a direct investment in terms of we don't take any equity. So that is a check that we write, you deposit in your bank account, and you use for innovation competition over the course of a year to advance your device. And that is a grant of up to $50,000. And we give those out annually with a certain budget allocated to those direct investments. Then we allocate just as much funding as we do in direct investments indirectly. So the nuance here is that we will allocate money to portfolio companies, just like a traditional investor would. However, we earmark that for certain things. So a company may have an ask. They may be looking at a regulatory consultant to help them with their 510(k) application, and they need to fund phases 1, 2, or 3 of a development. We may fund 2 phases, we may fund all 3, but the difference there is that we're funding a very specific ask in their journey to commercialization, as opposed to them applying for a grant, saying what they're going to do with the money, and then we give that to them directly to kind of execute on that plan. And that's a nuance that's dictated by our funder, the FDA, in terms of how much money can be given directly and how much can be given indirectly. All of it funds our portfolio companies, and at the end of the day gets them to the end. But what I like about the indirect mechanism, and I think this is really advantageous to early stage companies, is it really helps guide them as to what is going to fund their rate limiting step now. So that's what CTIP wants to focus on. If you're an early stage company, you could have a laundry list of 100 things you need done or funded. But what is keeping you from that next step? So rate limiting step is kind of just a science term I use if you're doing kind of an equation. What's that one thing that's going to help you jump to something else? So if that's getting through your regulatory path, so you can then go on to clinical trials or partnerships with other institutions, fantastic. That's what we want to fund, and that's what we want to focus on. If you're looking at the reimbursement strategy because you want to understand how you iterate on your device and how you should be looking at, really who is your true customer, then that's something we want to look at as well. So that allows us to apply our expertise, which is technically is free for our portfolio companies, and pair that with funding to have an outsized return, so to speak, on what may be a smaller check.
No, that's great. So when the FDA gives you the grant, you don't have any. I mean, you're investing. You're using the rigor of an investor, but that's philanthropic investment. And how do you measure impact as you invest in your portfolio companies?
So we measure impact in a couple different ways. In fact, if you looked at our FDA reporting, we measure about 50 different criteria for each company. And so these are things along the pathway that really helps define how a medical device company is moving along, right? Because if you're only saying we're helping you from concept to commercialization, and if you didn't commercialize, then you didn't do anything, that's unlikely because the timeline for commercialization is so long. So we're looking at how many patents were filed, how many people did you talk to about your marketing strategy? Where are you in the regulatory path? Are you doing clinical trials? Have you gone through some sort of animal testing? There are a laundry list of metrics that really help articulate where you are in that journey of concept to commercialization, since it's so vast in terms of years, but it does still have fairly defined steps that happen in this regular cadence or order. In addition, we look at a couple of other impact metrics because we want to see what is the business impact of CTIP on the world, and are these FDA grants really helping us move forward? The FDA specifically funded programs like CTIP because they were seeing innovation in the number of devices that were going to market with pediatric indications was pretty much flatlining. So there just wasn't that much innovation for people who are under 18. The FDA defines pediatric as technically under 21, but 18 to 21 is almost transitional adults. So people weren't making devices specifically for kids. What was happening is you're either using adult devices off-label in kids, which is legal and acceptable, but it just means it hasn't been studied directly for them. So we want to look at the business impact of CTIP with these grants and indirect funding. So we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics for our founders. So 34% of our founders are women, 20% are people of color, 11% includes veterans, LGBTQ, and And our companies have raised about $70 million in intake when they come to CTIP. And since joining CTIP, collectively, they've raised a little over $40 million as well. And we're looking at a diverse pool of companies in the sense that they range from over 20 different states. So regionally, we're looking at creating jobs through these companies and creating founders who are then going to go off and tell other founders that yes, you can start a peak med device company. It may be difficult, but it's useful to society, and we're really seeing an outsized effect there as well.
Great. And for those that are looking at innovating in the space, what advice do you have for them as they're walking into the med device space? Or they might have an idea like Javier, right, and enter the space, not realize they're in the med device space, and they say, oh, okay, I'm here. What's it like the first level of advice that you give to them?
Well, I think the first level of advice is, answer the why. Why are you innovating for this solution? Why did you decide to do this? Because it's going to be a long pathway. After you have your why, look at your who. So, who is this for? Is this to better help patients? Is this to better help, clinical care? Is this to assist the hospital? In the sense of when you're looking at any kind of company, kind of who is your end user? And then I would start doing a little bit of customer discovery. And so that's asking different folks along the value chain, whether that's clinicians, patients, institutions, about your idea. I think the one mistake we may see early stage, and specifically med tech founders make early on, is that they don't want to tell other people about their idea because it's kind of secretive. I want to say tell everybody about your idea. Make a billboard and tell every single person because you don't know where the feedback is going to come from. And those people are going to help you iterate very, very early. That's going to save you a lot of time. Because the chances are someone has already thought of a similar idea as yours, but it may not have been executed as well.
Yeah, great advice for those focusing on the med tech, the medical device space and beyond. So that's great. As it relates to working with some of your portfolio right now, because you have a large portfolio of companies, what are some of the challenges they're seeing, challenges and opportunities they're seeing right now in light of COVID?
So in light of COVID-19, a lot of them are thinking of either adapting their existing solution for something specific to COVID-19 or looking at kind of new avenues that are opened up by COVID. So we have a portfolio company called AirHealth. So they make an at-home device that you blow into, and it takes a bunch of different metrics like your O2 sat, the respiratory rate, other things. And so they're seeing an increased interest in remote patient monitoring. Remote patient monitoring is something new that's starting to be covered by Medicare as of this year. But now that patients are quarantining or isolating at home, and physicians want a way to follow up with them and understand what's happening with them since they're not sick enough to go into the hospital, they're really looking at solutions that can apply remote monitoring to those patients. And so this hasn't changed their existing device, but they are seeing an increased appetite in the market for this. And then they're looking at an emergency use authorization pathway through the FDA, because the FDA is fast tracking, so to speak, medical devices that can have a specific application to the current COVID-19 pandemic. So we're definitely seeing an increased appetite for all things healthcare at this point, but we're also seeing really creative ways that our founders are applying their existing technology to the current pandemic.
That's great. Especially there's this nuance, right, where there's directly addressing people with COVID and that are in the system, and then there's a number of people that would go for regular checkups and things like that, and just don't feel safe going to
right. And you can look at things like we have a portfolio company, Limbics. They're using AR, VR to support adolescents and teenagers with depression. And so now that people are, they're doing school from home, they're at home with their families, you could see kind of a potential increased spike in, mental health issues or just needing mental health support now virtually and remotely. So tools like this become even more paramount and important. So it's we're seeing our founders really think creatively about how what they're doing already can complement a solution to the pandemic or just support something that's already happening. We have another portfolio company, Sanofi Labs. They make a smart stethoscope that uses AI to diagnose respiratory sounds. We were super interested in them because it's something that can be used in resource constrained settings by non-medical professionals or clinicians. But it can also be used in like COVID-19 pandemic, for example, to reduce contact between clinicians, individuals, or those who are listening to part sounds or doing physical exams and the patient. And that's to kind of reduce the transmission of the disease. So I think our founders are starting to think not necessarily outside of the box, but how can what I'm doing continue to help with the crisis that's happening right now?
Great, great. Well, Kathryn, wanted to thank you for joining us. This is Kathryn Cooper, VC at the Consortium for Technology and Innovation in Pediatrics, joining us tonight to share her insight into investing in the healthcare space. Thanks for joining us. And this was Rebel One Live. Join us every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be interviewing founders and investors, sharing our insight. So check us out at rbl1.com/live. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathryn.